Welcome to the Milsurf Mike channel. I made SKS videos for my Russian, Chinese, and Albanian rifles with my Yugo 5966 remaining. Since I like to take a dive into the producing nation's history, and I have a prior rifle, I need to go over Yugoslavia's Mausers and my M48A. As I will take a much deeper dive into Mausers in general in future videos, I'll just stick with Yugoslavia's use of the Mauser and not the development of the Mauser itself. To start, we need to go over an abridged history of Yugoslavia itself leading to today's rifle. Most of the states that formed Yugoslavia were under either Habsburg or Ottoman occupation prior to World War I. Serbia won its independence from the Ottoman Empire in 1878 and would arm themselves with variations of the latest Mausers, first chambered in 10.15 by 63 black powder rounds in M71 and 84 actions, and 7 by 57 when they upgraded to smokeless with the M1895 and G98 actions, most notably the Model 1910 rifle. Two Balkan Wars were fought just prior to the First World War and saw most of the Ottoman Empire's lands in Europe stripped away from them as the Balkan League sought to liberate large swaths of their ethnic populations from their rule. None of the belligerents or major powers really ended these conflicts happy. As the Habsburg Empire occupied Bosnia and Herzegovina, and Serbia was not fond of this arrangement, Austria-Hungary sought to prevent a strong Serbia. Most with even a passing knowledge of history know about the Black Hand, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, and Gavrilo Princip taking a break from eating a sandwich. During the First World War, the Serbian army fought well against Austria-Hungary, Germany, and Bulgaria, but were eventually overwhelmed by superior numbers. After a fighting retreat to the mountains of Albania, the Serb army was evacuated to Greece and would later fight in the Sri campaign. The dissolution of Austrian-Hungarian Empire saw the creation of the state of the Slovenes, Croats, and Serbs, comprising of Bosnia-Herzegovina, Croatia, and Slovenia. They would unite with the Kingdom of Serbia itself united with Montenegro, Kosovo, and Vardar Macedonia, and this would become the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes. During the 1920s, power would centralize and become Serb-centered to the dismay of the Croats and Slovenes. A fascist organization would form in Croatia, the Ustashi, which had ties to Mussolini. As politicians were assassinated, King Alexander I would turn the country into a dictatorship monarchy and declare the nation the Kingdom of Yugoslavia. The Ustashi would assassinate Alexander while he was in France in 1934. The heir, Peter II, was 11, so his uncle, Paul, would rule as regent. Paul would sign the Tripartite Pact with Nazi Germany and Italy on March 25, 1941, which would keep Yugoslavia out of the war. This met with massive protests, and Paul would be overthrown 2 days later, and Peter II at 17 was announced that he was of age. The pact was no more. Germany soon invaded and occupied Yugoslavia in 12 days. Peter fled to exile, and the kingdom was split up with a puppet governments placed at the helm. The Ustashi would ethnically cleanse Jews and Serbs and Montenegrins would ethnically cleanse Croats and Muslims. Still, there was resistance groups who would fight for the national idea of Yugoslavia. First, there were the Chetniks who fought from the mountains of Bosnia. While they had successes, they would back off when Germany said they would kill civilians for every German soldier killed. Other groups, labeled as partisans led by the socialist Joseph Broz Tito, would use this to their advantage. They would liberate villages who would have no choice to join or else be slaughtered by the Germans. Many would join Tito, including veterans from the Spanish Civil War. Peter, from exile, would call for Yugoslavians to unite under Tito, and Tito would be mentioned as the leader of the Yugoslavs at the Tehran Conference. Further pushing people into partisan camp would be the Chetniks becoming more radical, calling for a greater Serbia, and ethnically cleansing Croats and Muslims from the villages that they quote-unquote liberated. By 1944, the partisans under Tito were able to start pushing Nazis out, and by the end of the war, they had regained all territory lost. The monarchy would be abolished in November 1945, and Tito would win a landslide victory in the following elections. Yugoslavia would become the Federal People's Republic of Yugoslavia. One thing needs to be mentioned. You might notice I use the term ethnic cleansing among member republics several times, thanks to nationalistic Serbs and fascist Croats. It was so bad that along with Muslims and Jews, every sixth Serb was killed during the war. This left hard feelings that Tito would have to try and repress under the guise that they were all Slavic brothers and Yugoslavs, and this nationalism would be a large part of the split with Stalin. These hard feelings would resurface with a vengeance half a century later, but that is outside the scope of this video. Tito's Yugoslavia would initially be close to Stalin's Soviet Union, but tensions would soon force a split. Since Tito's partisans had liberated Yugoslavia largely on their own, he was in a better position than most leaders after the war who needed help from either the Soviet Union or Western allies. Stalin would accuse Tito of nationalistic tendencies, and the Soviet Union would throw Yugoslavia out of the Comiform in 1948, hoping this, along with Soviet embargoes, would force Tito out of power. Tito would double down on his policies while reconciling with the West. Yugoslavia would be a non-Warsaw Pact communist country, receiving that sweet, sweet Marshall Plan aid. Stalin was afraid of this independence from the Soviet Union would reverberate throughout other Eastern Bloc nations, and Eastern Europe would be purged from Titoists. Stalin would arrange for the assassination attempts on Tito, so many so that Tito openly sent him a note saying, "Stop sending people to kill me. We've already captured 5 of them, one of them with a bomb and another with a rifle. If you don't stop sending killers, I'll send one to Moscow, and I won't have to send a second." Tensions with the Soviet Union would soon ease upon Stalin's death, but Yugoslavia remained committed to non-alliance. They would co-found the non-aligned movement with Nasser of Egypt, Nehru of India, Indonesia's Sukarno, and Ghana's Nkrumah in 1961. Yugoslavia would be a heavy player in decolonization movements around the world. With the background of Yugoslavia into the 1960s, I will continue this history in the Yugo SKS video. Let's talk about their use of Mausers. After World War I, Yugoslavia would receive rifles as reparations from Germany, Austria, Turkey, and Bulgaria. They would standardize on the 7.92 by 57 cartridge. When they sought new rifles, they were unable to order from their usual places in Germany thanks to the Versailles restrictions, so FN in Belgium and Českoslovakia in Brno, Czechoslovakia would fill the void. They'd order 100,000 FN model 1924 rifles from Belgium and 40,000 Czech model 1924 rifles from Brno. Yugoslavia desired to produce their own rifles, so they'd order equipment for this purpose from FN to produce at Kragujevac's arsenal. These rifles, along with earlier Serb Mausers, would be the arms used during World War II. After the war, part of Yugoslavia's independence streak would show in the fact that they were not converting to Soviet pattern rifles, instead sticking with Mausers. Many of these rifles left over from the war, as well as K98Ks from the Mauser factory as war payments, would be inspected and reconditioned at Kragujevac. The FN and Yugo Model 24s would become the Pushka M2447, ex-German K98Ks would become the 7.9mm Pushka M98N, and the former Czech M24s would become the Pushka M2452C. It was decided to restart production of Mausers at Kragujevac, and production of the Pushka M48 would begin in 1950. These rifles would feature a bent bolt with flattened knob, laminated stock, hooded sight, H-style bayonet lug, and an upper handguard extending from the front of the rear sight to the lower barrel band. The rear sight would stay the same as the Yugo M24. My rifle is a Pushka M48A. Production of these started in 1952 and would see stamped butt plates and magazine floor plates to cut costs. There was an M48B which had a stamped trigger guard, but all these were marked M48A. Besides use in the Yugoslav military and reserves, M48A rifles would be sold to Burma, Syria, Egypt, Algeria, Iraq, Indonesia, and Chad. According to Scarlata, production of the M48A and B rifles would continue into 1965. When Kragujevac began production of the SKS pattern rifles in 1959 and AK pattern rifles in 1964, the Mausers were moved to reserve and police duty and would see arsenal refurbishment into the 1980s. Many would find their way into the Balkan Wars in the 1990s. Before I talk about my rifle, I do want to address something that wasn't the clearest to me as I read different sources when dealing with Yugoslavian and Serbian arms. You see the Kragujevac arsenal, Preduzece, and of course Zastava factories, and I gathered they were all in the city of Kragujevac, and I apologize for the butchering of that pronunciation. but I was unclear whether these were all the same factory. After asking someone I consider a Mauser expert here who wasn't sure, I figured I'd ask somebody from that area of the world. Žiga from Poland are tactical. Yes, Slovenia and Serbia are now different countries, but it would still be the same drive for him as it would be for me going from Kansas City to Memphis, Tennessee. I'm pretty confident saying that all three are the same factory and can be used interchangeably. I bought my M48A from J&G Sales Black Friday sale in 2018 for $350, and this is probably the cheapest way that many can get a K98K pattern rifle in recent years. My intentions when I got it was to keep it and use it for trade bait, but it's in such nice shape, I decided to keep it for the Mauser collection. I'm glad I did now to help with the continuous history for Yugo firearms. I really haven't fired this much except to get some shooting footage for this video, but it's basically like shooting pretty much any K98K. Events this spring have conspired against me getting a 100 to 200 yards range setup so I can look at some accuracy. This is also the holdup on at least one collaboration, so maybe I'll have to do a big Mauser comparison video in the future. I wonder how smooth the 2452C would be. Remember that I called the Czech M24 one of the smoothest 8mm rifles I ever fired, because the M48A is definitely not as smooth as the CZ24. It is certainly a better looking rifle, but I'd take the VZ24 over it any day. If you want to learn more about that rifle, click over here. Have I missed something? What would you like to hear about next? Let me know in the comments below. Please join the GOA and get a discount with the link in the description. Thank you for watching, and as always, have a great day.